another common thing that we hear from parents, not all parents, but I think maybe like the more old school parents, they'll say things like, it's just kind of macho, but like, well, if you can't do it on your own, then you don't deserve it. Like, what kind of reaction do you have when you hear that school of thought, I guess?
I think that's just the wrong way to think about it. I mean, if that was the case, you could make the argument if you can't pay for school, don't go or something.
Right.
I mean, we're parents, so we do what we can to push them as far as we can, and and I think it falls on us to just give them as much support as we can, and it's like you say, it's an investment in his future, and well, you buy him a car. Does he really need a car? But I think it's more valuable than
Yeah.
many other things that parents spend money on.
Yeah.
So uh,
No, I think that's a great point. Sorry, were you gonna say something, Jacob, before I
Yeah,
said?
I want to back off that. Yeah, I think it's a bit of a flawed way of thinking. I mean, why do we need professors then? I mean, I think we touched about this, earlier in the meeting, but you mentioned yourself, you got to do the legwork still. Let's say I never joined Wall Street Mastermind. Guess what? I'd still have to network. I'd still have to find a way to, better my behavioral skills and technical skills. But, it just helped me a bit more. And the community itself, with the coaches and with the students, all they allow is, someone to talk to, someone to kind of bounce ideas off of. For example, since I joined, one of the main reasons, I didn't obviously have, students around me that are going for it. That was definitely a big plus from Wall Street Mastermind. I actually got to, surround myself with more, like-minded people. I got to do mock interviews with them when if I asked one of my classmates at the time when I started doing mock interviews, some mock, they'd be like, "What are you mocking for?" You know what I mean? So it's just like I don't know. It's
Yeah.
yeah, I don't agree with you for sure.
Yeah, I think like I understand the parents that come from the standpoint of like, hey, I earned everything myself when I was coming up, and so I want you to be self-sufficient too, because it builds character or whatever. But I do think that part of it is that um, one, the times have changed, right? I think like for a lot of parents now whose kids are college aged, back when you were coming up and you were looking for a job, like the internet wasn't even around yet. I don't think, like the proliferation of information, in terms of like what you what your competition has at their disposal. It's a night and day difference, right? Like back in those days, if you said you wanted help, like if there's no internet, like where can you even go and get help? You like go talk to your banker go talk to your neighbor who's an investment banker that lives, right next to you. Like it's just not the same thing, right? And so like even if you say like, oh, like I didn't have any help back when I was doing this. Well, yeah, but your competition also didn't have any help because that was just the context back then, right? But that's not the context that your kid is living in today, which is everyone has a lot of resources at their disposal. And if your kid is the only one who doesn't have any resources, then you're actually forcing them to, it's not even being self-sufficient, you're forcing them to fight with one hand tied behind their back, which they're actually handicapped, right? And then so that's one, it's just like different times, different contexts, and different level of competition. Like as is the case with anything in life, like typically the really desirable things, like they only become harder and harder to obtain. Like getting into an Ivy League school today is harder than getting into Ivy League school 20 years ago, right? Getting into the top banks today is harder than it was like 20 years ago. I mean, I recruited 15 years ago. It was like I would get. I think about the candidate I was 15 years ago when I broke in. Like I would get blown out of the water by the kids that I'm coaching today because they're just like Jacob is so much more prepared than I ever was back then. And that just is what it is. And that's okay. Right. And sometimes I think about like my kids are 2 and 4. And I kind of like think about like, hey, what's gonna happen when they're 18 years old or 20 years old? Like, what are they gonna be doing about it? I don't know. I guess by then AI will take over the world and nothing will matter. But but so like I think context matters, right? Which is, you have to think about what your kids are doing relative to other people. And then the other thing too is just like, honestly, if you really think about the successful people in the world, I don't actually believe that they all did it on their own. In fact, like all the most successful people had people that helped them along the way. All the successful people had mentors that took them under their wings or gave them advice, or there's this book behind me, $1 Trillion Coach. Like it's about Bill Campbell, who's this guy that coaches like the top CEOs in Silicon Valley, like the CEO of Google, CEO of Apple, CEO of Microsoft. Like these are the most successful executives in the world, and they have coaches to help them be better executives. And it's like, did they get to that level on their own? Like, no, right? Or even like sports, LeBron James. Like, did LeBron James become LeBron James on his own? Like, no, he had coaches, he had like trainers, nutritionists. He pays for like whatever, physical therapists, massage chambers, things that we don't even understand. Like that guy spends like over $1 million a year on his body, and then everyone's like, oh, LeBron is like so much longevity, and he's like the greatest of all time. But it's like the reason why he's that way is because he invests so much more into his body than like anybody else in the league. And do his peers say like knock him for doing that and say, oh, therefore LeBron doesn't deserve it? Or are his peers just like, yeah, LeBron's the greatest? Like, so it's like, I think like, yeah, it's a mindset shift of going from like, hey, like if you don't, I think saying like, hey, you have to do everything on your own or else you don't deserve it. It's really the only thing that's doing is like holding your kid back, in my opinion, and not allowing them to live up to their fullest potential, and to your point, like you already pay for their school, probably you already pay for their car, you already pay for all these other things. The same rationale there applies, right?